Okay, welcome everybody. Let's get started. Thanks a million for joining us. I know there are graduates, learners, and some special invited guests joining us from all over the world. There's over 20 countries on this call right now. So thank you so much for joining us. This is the latest in our Masterclass series for learners and graduates. And we have a very topical subject for you today, all about pandemic learnings. We put the post in there because we're hoping it's going to end soon, but things seem to keep going on. But post-pandemic learnings, trends and actions is what we're all about today. It's literally turned the world upside down, and we need to talk about it. We'd love your input, as always. I think the best way to do it is to send a question in or a comment by chat, and we'll get to it. If you want to speak, you can speak. There's no problem. Just let us know. Maybe stay on mute until you want to speak, and then we can get you up to speak if you'd like to ask a question or discuss any topics. Delighted to be joined today by Michael Killeen, our chairman. Michael has immense experience in the world of CX, both here in Europe and in the US. Also joining us today is Brian Horgan, and Brian is our corporate engagement director, and Brian also has a wealth of experience on the consultancy side in CX. So good morning to both of you, and thank you for joining us. So we've got to address the changes that COVID has brought us. You know, let's say that 10 or 15 years of normal business evolution has suddenly appeared before us in the space of about 12 months, which is hugely challenging for us. It's changed the way we connect with companies and how this makes us feel. It's changed the way we work. It's the needs of employees have also changed. And most significantly, it has forced us to depend on technology and the online experience. So to discuss these trends today, what we're going to do is just going to have a quick look at the agenda for today. It's very straightforward and very simple. We're going to look at key CX learnings and trends that are hopefully going to stay with us for quite some time, so at least give us a chance to catch up. We're going to look at this from both angles. We're going to look at it from the customer experience angle, which Michael is going to take us through in a minute. And we're also going to look at it from the employee experience angle, which Brian has a lot of experience in. We're also going to talk about action planning. So in each section, we're going to talk about what actions you can practically take to deliver, to learn about this pandemic, to learn about the changes that have happened, and to continue to excel and deliver a CX and EX excellence. And then right at the end, we're going to try and wrap it up in a conclusion. And we'd love to have any questions that you guys have at the end, and we'll talk about that. So without further ado, I'm going to hand over to Michael Killeen to take you through the changes that have been brought about in the customer experience. Hi, Mike. How's it going?
Hey, Julian, you can hear me okay?
Yeah, fine.
Okay, great stuff. Listen, thank you again. Delighted to be here today. An incredible audience. I'm looking at some of the countries that are coming through. I'm very excited, but I'll try and slow down my pace a little bit so that we can, you can all understand me. We Irish get very excited and no one can understand a word we say after a while. So I'll try and slow things down a little bit here today. I'm going to go straight into it, Julian. I think, you know, what's going on. I mean, let's take a look at some of the impacts, some of the emotional impacts that are kind of with us now to stay. And I think one of the first things is this whole recognition that basically life is for living. You know, we've all spent a fair bit of time in lockdown, no matter what country we're in. And we're starting to realize the importance of friends and communities, et cetera. And I think one of the nice kind of insights I have around that was that you just have to look at the kind of the millennials, or in sometimes they're known as the snowflakes audience. And they were kind of perceived to be more prone to take offense and kind of stand back and go into rooms on their own. And they really came to the plate during COVID. And I think this is one of the most remarkable things. And I have kids of that age and that era. And they really, for the first time in their lives, have come to the fore. They're really helping the elderly, getting more involved in community projects, etc. So, you know, we're seeing this happening all the time. I also think when you move that into the company space, you know, there's a greater awareness now of those companies that are genuinely looking after their customers and employees, which Brian will talk about a little later. But instead of those companies who are just looking after shareholders. And we see this time and time again. Those companies that look after their customers and employees rank far higher than those companies who don't. They're just looking at profitability across all of the league tables around the globe. So that's quite interesting to see. And then we have this kind of movement that's here with us permanently, which is this trying to get this balance of investment in that face-to-face experience delivery alongside technology. Technology is here to stay. It's just a matter of getting that balance right in terms of investment. And then, of course, a need for consistent health and safety reassurance, that's with us to stay. And we see, particularly in retail, lots of companies that aren't taking that seriously yet. And particularly in the States, we still have this whole argument about mask wearing, et cetera. And customers won't go in if they're not 100% confident that they're safe to go in. So these are things to stay. Let's start out with looking at the 6 drivers. The majority of the people who are on this session will be familiar with them, but for those who aren't, in essence, we have a framework that drives a lot of the work that we put in place. And it's built around 6 key drivers that most companies are already working in, and it's all about creating this key bond. But if we take a look at the 6, I mean, the first one, I trust you. It is absolutely going to be critical that trust is in place, because if I don't trust you as a business, I simply am not going to do business with you. And we're seeing that happening already. Me, that whole deep personalization driver. Those companies who are dealing with my best interest in mind, I am going to give them more business. If they don't, and they're just seeking greater profitability, goodbye. So that's a huge trend coming forward. And then that make it easy thing is, it's really all about convenience. And I expect that in every transaction, because my expectations have gone through the roof. So your convenience is just, it's expected. And if you're not making it convenient for me, goodbye. So it's a real challenge there. And you get into the last 3 drivers, and you get me is all about, that really is all about empathy, and that importance of empathy has completely raised and will remain raised as we get out there. And there's been a kind of big shift towards you get us, not just you get me. A lot of companies are now doing programs for communities rather than just individuals because of COVID. So you'll see a lot of investment in community type programs. We're seeing it in our own markets here. And I think you're going to see plenty of that going forward. And then this whole area of delivering on your promise, it's expected. You need to go the extra mile. One of my colleagues and I have been talking about this over the years, just simply meeting expectations was as good as it got, because it's so difficult, but that's no good anymore. We have to exceed expectations. That's a huge challenge for us all, but that is a trend going forward. And then finally, the whole area of resolution around you fixing things. We sense that this is really a deep, deep area for growth going forward, particularly becoming a key differentiator. So when you think about if you have a complaint and you address it with a company and they fix that for you there and then heroically, you'll put down the phone and you'll turn around to a colleague or a family member and say, you won't believe what my bank just did for me. And you become an immediate advocate for them. So I think we'll see a lot more money invested in that whole area of fixing issues. And that's great to hear. That's a good move. There are 8 key trends I'm going to talk about. And then I'll follow this up very quickly before handing over to Brian. I'll follow it up with actions to support each of these 8. And I think the first one to me is obviously, the obvious thing is there will be, and there is, an increase in online usage. But just be careful. Look, it's not sufficient on its own to deliver CX excellence. So you've got to get that balance right with the technology and the human touch. No question, online is here to stay, and it's growing and growing and growing. But we just have to be careful. It's not a quick fix for everything. If you are leading in that particular space, you will have to continue to invest and invest and invest. And it only lasts for a short period of time before somebody catches it. The second area is this whole area of seeking greater value. So during COVID, what we've noted is that most consumers have had more time on their hands and less money in their pocket. And what that means is, they're really seeking greater value with using that time. And what I wanted to do, and we'll talk about the actions behind this, it's not just about price points. It is about what can we offer where can we offer more in terms of our products and services. And we'll have a chat about that. And then we all know that higher expectations, my God, literally going through the roof. They are soaring, they continue to. But what's happening post-COVID is the reduced tolerance from consumers and patient levels. Going the extra mile for customers demonstrates authentic care, but the expectation is, I expect you to go the extra mile. And that's bloody difficult, it really is. And then we have this area of the use of self-service for routine needs. I'm talking about it's be it online or on phone or even in person. Self-service is here to stay, and we have to get that balance right. So it could be looking at chat box versus kind of a greater customer human touch from agents. So that's something we all have to explore, and are we doing that in the right way? The last four, really, one key one I think we all know is about advocacy. It really is becoming a primary lead generation and sales engine for companies. When we get people to sell our business on our behalf, it's more believable. Our job is no longer just to sell product. Our job today is to give customers a great experience so that those customers go out of their way to sell our product. And that's our job. So there's a big shift there, and that's here to stay. And I mentioned about this whole area of complaints management as a differentiator. Those companies that empower staff to fix things there and then, that's a differentiator. That's a true differentiator. And I think we're going to see that big shift in that area. And then the seventh one is really CX becoming this driver for profitability, supported by hard metrics. And we were on a session yesterday, and it was quite interesting. Soft measurements such as NPS, still critically important. However, I think there's certain companies. So if you're a company that's in startup mode, things like NPS and CSAT scores, etc., they're really, really, really important. But as companies become, when you're talking to companies that are more mature, it really is about the sales numbers, etc. So we got to get that balance right. And I think, Brian, you and I had this chat yesterday about, isn't it about merging the measurements around metrics around employee and customer together, merging those to really get a good side. So I'm sure we'll talk about that a little later. And as I mentioned, Brian will cover this whole area of the frontline employees as being the new heroes. I think we're going to see significant change in how we reward and how we train, how we empower frontline staff, and also how we get back office staff to realize they play a critical role in supporting front office staff. So these are the big trends that we see on the customer side. And I'll just take you through a couple of the kind of actions that we're looking at. So if you take a look at this increase in online usage, let's recognize first off that it's not sufficient on its own to be a differentiator to deliver CXX. It is critically important. So what we need to do in terms of actions is, does our online journey currently make it easier for our customers to engage? The order process, the pick, pack, and ship. Julian, you and I spoke yesterday at length about this whole differentiator in terms of just even the packaging when it arrives in your house. Are we doing enough there to deliver a really interesting experience? Simple little tasks like that. And then, of course, the resolution around any returns. How easy do you make it? Is our online consistent with our retail and our call center experience? And do our delivery partners live up to our own customer promise? Because if they fail, we fail, and we've got to accept that. And are we getting the right balance between the technology and those human touch initiatives? So there's some really good actions there that we can all start to explore. The second one I mentioned was this whole area around greater value. And again, workshops should be organized within your organization, getting all of the silos together. And how can we deliver more product or service benefits rather than simply reducing cost? It's not necessarily about that. We've learned over the years that customers are willing to pay more for better experiences. But cost and value is important now. So I think with global inflation now upon us, the first things we need to start doing is just, let's start empathetically communicating with our customers that if there are price increases coming down the tracks, that we're explaining the reasons why and doing that clearly and honestly. Honesty is so important in anything we deliver around price increases. And do we also make it easy for customers to view comparison pricing for our shopping? Now that would suggest that pricing is still important. It is important, of course it is, but price and value. That's where the key element we need to start looking at, and it pays off big time. This next section, which is really all about higher expectations, look, they continue to soar across all markets, across all sectors. And I think, one of the things that we should all be looking at is, whether we need to revive our customer promise post-COVID. And one of the things I noticed recently was I'm seeing a huge investment in this whole area of self-driving cars. And when you think about it, I mean, they're not self-driving cars. That's a customer promise that has failed out there. They're actually cars that sometimes drive themselves. So little examples like that. Look at the customer promise you're delivering out there, and does it live up to it? Because unfortunately, consumers today won't tolerate over-promising. So, it's a really good area to workshop within your organization. And, look at your customer promise and examine what's changed about your promise during COVID that we may want to keep, we may want to build on. I think that's a really interesting exercise. We find ourselves doing a fair bit of that, and there's some great insights that trip out of that. And then, of course, reassess the role of self-service tools across the journey. Is it the right amount? Does it come at the right time? Simple little steps like that. Identify where the value add moments are post-COVID. And I think, again, simple process of getting everybody around the table to add that. And then again, you might look at doing workshops about how can we go that extra mile, explore, are we possibly over-promising at the moment and under-delivering? Because if that's the case, it won't be tolerated. And then, find those hurdles that are there to fix so that we can really deliver. And then finally, just look, let's move away from merely trying to meet customers' expectations and raising the bar to try to actually exceed expectations. It's a challenge, it's a tough one, but it's worth doing. The fourth area, again, is all about self-service, and the actions around this really is about auditing. I would have a look at your competitor self-service offerings, both inside your sector, but go outside your sector too, and see what are the companies out there doing great work. Can you apply that? Are you making these self-service decisions based on cost savings alone, or is it really good for your customers? And you've got to weigh that up, because if it's cost savings alone, we're falling into the wrong side here. Work with customers themselves and identify where self-service is welcome and where it's not welcome. And there's plenty of technology options out there. So look at what ones are going to make life easier. And again, something really significant. Don't forget the vulnerable customers. What do they need? That's a separate conversation, particularly around self-service. In many cases, they can't participate there and they just want that human touch. So always be prepared to add them into your conversation. The fifth area is all about advocacy. And we basically feel that the current advocacy rates of companies needs to increase. And it's worth your while trying to explore what is your current advocacy rate by just talking to your customers, talking to employees, and doing some basic research there. Again, carry out workshops to identify ways of getting customers to become more active and unbiased ambassadors for your brand. And avoid rewarding advocacy, because these efforts quickly become kind of bribes. So we have a lot of companies investing now in new loyalty programs. Be careful there, because a lot of customers see through that. They see that loyalty programs are probably more beneficial for the company than they are for me. So it's better to be legitimate in terms of your reward in that space. And let's shift greater resource into retention, because current acquisitions, I think customers are getting tired of it, being bombarded with sales. Let your customers do that selling for you. That's really the key challenge. And again, get buy-in that everybody's job has changed from the selling of products to giving customer experiences. That's a really critical element. When your company starts to buy into that, then your customers will end up doing the selling for you. So it's worth exploring how best to do that. And also, no harm in setting a really hard target in terms of the number of customers that become advocates. Can you imagine if you went to your financial director and said, I'm going to seek to get 10% of our customers to become advocates? I mean, they're free. It's phenomenal. So it's worth the investment to put that in place. We get into complaint management actions. And again, are we, first of all, tracking complaints? Many of the larger enterprises are doing that, and they're forced to do that. But, it's really worth looking at. And are we resolving these issues heroically? And what we mean by that is kind of quickly, empowering, making sure it's not a pain for people to call you. And remember, those who do call you are likely to be your most loyal. Do you have complex issues that customers would prefer actually to talk to somebody human, or can they fix that just with a chat box, etc.? Are we getting the balance right between the tech and the human touch? And are we empowering our employees and staff and also our outsourced partners? That's really important to deliver that first-time resolution. Do we train them? Are we providing them with the tools so that they can do that in a heroic way? There's also more, because there's a huge growth in this area. I think we need to recognize that complaint management could be a major differentiator for your business. And I think, empowering frontline employees to own that. And there's some companies out there, probably outside of your sector, who do this brilliantly. Look and explore what they're doing it, how they're doing it, and identify the benefits. And they're quite immediate, when you fix an issue around complaints. How do we access and how can we further speed up the resolutions? Speed is really critical in this particular area. And can we create this unified customer complaints resolution culture throughout the whole organization, so everybody is behind that movement? And understand why complaints are on the rise globally. Obviously, customers' expectations are going through the roof, but there's a whole range of other things that are driving that, social media access and so on. We're picking it up. It's going to continue to grow. And in many cases, there's an 80-20 rule that applies to all businesses. 80% of all the complaints really account for 20%. So try and identify what they are and start fixing them prior to them taking place. And again, just make sure that your staff, your employees have the right tools and skills to deliver this resolution quickly. And we get into the whole C-suite and decisions being supported by hard metrics. We've had this debate many, many times, and I just get a sense that, look, to deliver customer experience excellence, the C-suite need to get on board. They really need to understand the benefits of it. And I think we need to find ways as individuals to report the hard measurements to the C-suite, as well as the softer measurements like NPS, CSAT, and basically CXI scores. But the C-suite do put greater emphasis on hard measurements, such as kind of sales, cross-selling, price point increase, churn reduction, huge, employee longevity and motivation, massive for the HR element of your business. And then, of course, the whole business cost reductions. But look, it will, if you get this area right, it will lead you to this market differentiator. So good luck with that. And then finally, employees are the new heroes. And this is a nice way for me to kind of leave out and hand over to you, Brian. But in essence, look, employees have become to the fore during the pandemic. And I just believe that we need to recognize that and help them going forward. So it is a trend that's here to stay. And I think, creating that customer experience excellence task force to include both frontline and back office staff, and don't put up with, well, we shouldn't be in this meeting because it's not my job. It is your job. Get them to understand how important that is. And I think, workshops about how all employees can help deliver CX excellence is really important. Action workshops should include both employees, but try and sometimes bring in customers into those workshops. And if it's possible, bring some of your outsourced partners in too, because you can have some really quick fixes come by bringing that whole group together. And again, it's so important to bring embed the whole program with a kind of employee communications program, keeping everybody up to date with your successes, but also the failures. It's important that you share where we're not winning so that everybody can try and figure that out. And then, of course, offer your best employees opportunities to continue to train and make sure that they're supported right throughout the process. So there are some actions for you in some of the long-term customer experience elements. I think it's time to hand over to Brian. Brian, you might take us through your thinking around the employee experience, and I'll hand over to you. I hope that's okay, Julian.
Thanks, Michael. Thanks very much. So when we were putting this together, we felt we would be at fault if we didn't look at what the employee experience over the last 18 months have been. If we're saying staff are the new heroes, frontline staff and those that support frontline staff, what was it like for them? And research, as Michael was saying, research increasingly shows that you cannot deliver good customer experience if you don't deliver great employee experience. You can't ask employees to create trust if you don't trust them. The structure of this is similar to Michael's. We're going to look at the drivers, we're going to look at the trends, the emerging needs, and then we're going to leave you with a bank of actions that you can take away and put in place, hopefully immediately after this webinar. And this section is for people who are managing customer-facing teams or support teams. And it's also if you're an employee and your manager is doing good or bad and you want to tackle it. It'll give you some tools for that too. So to begin, like Michael did with the emotional drivers as well, the I trust you, like customers, like customer experience, the I trust you for employees has risen in importance over the last 18 months. It's critical to employee retention and productivity, and it's driven by remote working and good, bad management practices. So basically, if my boss or manager isn't trusting me, that is going to stay in my memory and is going to determine whether I stay with the company or not long term. You know me, so all of our circumstances have changed. The majority of us are working from home. We're either doing that on our own, with flatmates, with family, with children. Do my bosses understand the challenges of this, of working remotely? How my individual situation has changed, how my role has changed in the pandemic. If I'm a customer-facing person online, research from the Call Center Management Association, the UK, shows that calls have spiked, customers are less patient, complaints are rising. Do my managers see that? You make it easy. So are there clear processes in place for me now that I'm dealing with more online queries? Can I do things in my own way? Is it simple to deliver for customers? Have you made it easy for me to do my job in a more stressful environment? You get me? So you get me is kind of heightened empathy, really. So it's rising importance because and now I'm working from home as an employee. Is my voice still heard? Am I listened to? Am I valued? What actions show me as an employee that you are a man or woman of your word and that you're following through in your actions? That one cannot be underestimated. You deliver in your promise. So Michael talked about the customer promise, and this section is about the staff promise. So the staff promises in many companies are things like, we respect you, we value you, we will work with you, we will train and educate you. Have you done that? Is it delivered on? And this piece will have an increased relevance for staff advocacy. There is a rise in staff advocacy similar to customer advocacy. Do I recommend my company to other people? And on the back of that, is my company recruiting the right people? And you fix things. Channel harmony is never been more important. It's critical. If it's not in place now, the company isn't delivering for the frontline staff, and by default, they're not delivering for the customer. So from those emotional drivers, trends are emerging. Some are obvious, you'll know them, you're living most of them. Blended working from home and in the office, you know the research, most people want a combination of the two, so there will be remote working going on for the foreseeable future. Potential burnout of frontline employees. This is an increasing trend, with the research saying that complaints are increasing and the patience of customers is reducing. There is a knock-on effect of burnout for frontline employees, and that needs to be addressed and needs to be prevented. There's a greater understanding within C-suite of all employees' importance in the business, and a recognition that the employees are now the brand, and particularly the customer-facing employees. New management styles are needed. This is huge. Research across the board, particularly by HR agencies, show a disconnect between what managers are thinking and feeling and perceiving and what their teams are. So research done by a global onboarding employee company called Emborder, they researched 3,000 employees and managers. Managers rated their understanding of their team's needs at 75%. Employees rated it at 32%. Now that is a gap. And each of us as managers needs to look at that individually and say, actually, how am I really doing? Frontline employees are the drivers of customer advocacy and the customer promise. They are, as I mentioned earlier, they are the brand. And alignment to values is either true or not. So the company is either delivering on its values or it's not. There's no gray area now. And your manager is either delivering on those values or not. So the trends and now the needs. The needs coming through from the employee. Basically, if I'm your team member and I want you to align the other departments so I could do my job better, particularly when handling a complaint, and I need that ASAP because it shows you value me, it shows you value the customer, it's not just talk. And I want you to empower me more because I've gained in confidence with customer over the last number of months. I know my importance and I know I'm doing the job well. Give me more autonomy. I know my customer may be better than you do. Pay me more because I know I'm increasing importance. I can see the customer advocacy generating sales. I can see it coming through my work. Pay me more. I want to change a scene. I may leave. You may all be familiar with the term the big redundancy because it's coming through as a significant trend on the employee side. If, as Michael was saying, time with family and friends is important and valuing the finite time we have in life, if I'm not in the right job and if the job isn't looking after me, or if I'm tipping towards burnout, I'm out. Support me. I'm tired. And measure me in a way I can understand. And also I'd add that I'm not beaten up by. So Michael's suite of metrics, they need to be looked at there, not just net promoter score, because if it's one figure can go up and down, and that can be used to beat or cheer, and it's inconsistent. It needs a suite. And invest in me, give me a career path that really works. I'm making a difference for the company. Invest in me, educate me, train me, give me a career path. So from those trends, from those needs, what are the actions you can do as a manager or to influence your manager? So the first is to review the practices, because that gap between the perceptions is huge. It needs to be addressed ASAP. So identify where performances has decreased and increased across your teams or within your team, within yourself. Spot your stars, spot your droppers, start talking to them. What's going on? Why a drop? Why a growth? What are you doing that others aren't doing? What's good about it? Get talking. Assessing employee sick leave and turnover to identify possible problem areas. Review the sick leave, because you can have a brilliant culture within the company, but you can have what they call a service climate where one manager is spoiling the barrel. So get really close to sick leave and turnover. As CX practitioners, the closer you can get to the HR people at the moment, the better. Rolling out a COVID-specific employee survey, and this links to some of the ideas in Michael's piece. You know, if you haven't done it already, what were the last 18 months like? How had your circumstances changed? How did you find juggling your family and work together? What could we do differently for you? What worked? What didn't work? This one then, management practices and processes would have been introduced on a huge scale over the last 18 months. I see that coming through from the submissions to the CX Awards actually as well. But so it's worth stepping back and documenting and auditing all the processes you've introduced since March 2020, and look at them as a story and go, what message or trend is coming through in these practices? Are they for employees? Are they controlling? Are they trusting? Does it show we know them? Does it show we get them? What story does it tell? And does that story match your staff promise? Then brainstorm among everybody, your employees, managers, C-suite, about which of these new practices have worked best, and be ruthless on them. Keep, drop, add, go back to employees saying we're changing this because of your feedback. And then cross-check employee journeys with customer journeys. If you haven't written your employee journey, it's time to do it. Match it to your customer journey. Are they in harmony, or is there discord there? And also, on the back of the trends that Michael brought you through, your customer journeys do need to be reviewed to see how they address them, like the technology piece coming through on a large scale because it's more online. And when you've done that, then cross-check them and look at them from the employee's point of view and identify what the employee now plays within that, the support offices and the front line. Has it changed? Do you need to change the roles? And within the roles then, and so this is the second action, review frontline employee roles. So reevaluate the roles they're now playing and build new job roles using the customer journey as the starting point. So almost reverse engineer them. Look at the journey and go, this is what we want the customer to go through. Okay, so what does the employee need to do? What type of employee do we need to recruit for this? And then, and this one might be controversial, but we really feel it here, review the frontline employee income as their role has changed dramatically. it's no point us saying they're the new heroes if they're not rewarded either by education or financially. They're now the drivers of customer advocacy. Realign employee training budgets and salaries accordingly, because that will keep them, as well as everything else. That's an important part of it. Review the frontline employee voice. So we've said review the practices, review their role, now review and listen to their voice. So the first thing, assess the frontline employee feedback and input over the last 12 months. Have people gone quiet or have people started talking more? If they've gone quiet, you've got a problem. Depending on the assessment, review the current employee feedback surveys. So review the information that's coming through from feedback surveys and the nature of the feedback surveys and how they're done. Is it still appropriate how you're doing it? Are they in the right format? Do you need to change them? Do you need to make them more agile to suit people working from home? Research shows that there is a significant fall off and drop off in management one-to-one contact with employees working remotely. That needs to be addressed. So you need to audit yourself and go, am I in contact with my employees enough? And then employee reviews, your 6-month review, your 12-month reviews. Managers should meet together and independently review the trends that are coming through and the messages that are coming through. Does the approach need to change? Who is doing the reviews very well? Whose team is performing very well in the back of those reviews? How do you adapt that? So they would be, and then finally, measure the customer complaints and levels and trends coming through. If they are increasing, your employees need more support, more timeout counseling, whether they have fed that back to you or not. If there is a spike in complaint levels, your employees, because they're working remotely. So previously, working in the organizations that I did in call centers, they would have worked together and they would have talked the stress out with each other, and they don't have that now. So they need more support, particularly if the complaint level is increasing. You need to value them as much as the customer. And then you need to review your current customer champions or your influencers, and are they still the same people? Have new stars appeared? Because stress affects people differently, and it's a very specific kind of stress we're in. So new people may shine more in this time. So just make sure, are there stars appearing that you haven't identified, and actually they should be the voice of your customers in your organization. So to summarize it, those three: review your practices, review the roles and the rewards, and just review the feedback mechanisms that are in place as well. That's me, Julian. I hope that's of use to people.
Michael, Brian, thank you so much. That's really interesting, really good actions to take away there. So I suppose really just to sort of put it into a nutshell, we used to only look at the customer experience and the employee experience, and we would call the best of those worlds CX excellence. Now technology is a massive part of it. Technology now has to live up to the face-to-face experience. It has to live up to all of those other channels that we use. As Michael said, technology and online is not a differentiator. Everybody is using it, so it has to be the best. And if you're going to use it as a differentiator, it has to be head and shoulders above the rest. So now it's customer experience, it's the employee experience, it's CX, technology, and online, and all of those together create CX excellence. I thought that it was very, very interesting, some of the points you made, and I would like to pick up, Brian, with you for a second.
Sure.
Brian, you've got a lot of experience in dealing with employees and dealing with emotional intelligence, all that kind of area. What happens if I'm an employee and I'm being asked to go back to the office and I don't want to go back to the office? How does that work from an employee perspective, and how does that work from a management perspective, and how does one deal with those situations?
I think it's case by case, and it depends on the history of that employee with the company to date. So if that employee is known for challenging things consistently, it might be a slightly different take to someone who we know is a star performer, who we know does the job well, and actually may be nervous about going back to the office and needs a slightly different approach. So it's the quality of the person asking you that you'd look at, and then if they are a performer for you, that the feedback for you is going, customers love them, you'd work with them as much as you can.
Brilliant. And Mike, a lot of this that we're talking about today is we're talking about, I mean, it's really down to communication. A lot of us are apart. A lot of us are trying to do business apart, but it's really down to communication. And we use workshops hugely. We've talked about workshops. We've talked about brainstorming sessions. We've talked about getting people together. We now have to get them together in a virtual world. I mean, just generally, even regarding workshops that happen face-to-face in the kind of olden days, well, how do you run them? How do you run them, Michael? How do you, I've been at loads and loads of your sessions. How do you get that engagement and can you give us any tips on that?
Yeah, I think when we started on the journey, we all felt, you know, look, technology is here. We can continue to grow the business in the technology world, but we were all looking forward to the face-to-face. We haven't done that for a while. And, you know, I'm not finding any fall off in terms of the quality of the outputs that we're getting in a virtual workshop than we would in a face-to-face. I'm looking forward to coming back to face-to-face and seeing how that will work again. But, you know, I think when you're in the virtual world, they are very productive sessions. Sometimes you lose a bit of engagement, a bit of networking, you know, people talking to one another. But, you know, if it does keep, if there's a very tight purpose. So in other words, when you start your workshop and you have a very defined purpose, why are we here? And you stick to that, you will be successful. Sometimes that gets a bit loose when we're all in the room face to face. It might go in one direction. We might be a bit. So we haven't, you know, I think we've been pleasantly surprised at how wonderful the workshops have been in that particular space. Now we're trained facilitators, as you probably know. And so from that perspective, you know, I just find that we are being far more productive in 1 hour of a virtual workshop than we would be in 1 hour of a face-to-face. And it's proven to be absolutely brilliant. But I am looking forward to possibly getting back to, even if it's just a hybrid model of a mixture of both. I am looking forward to seeing people too, because we as facilitators, we miss out slightly in terms of the reaction. But that's not critical to the output that comes from it. So I think virtual is working very, very well there, Julian.
Do you know what I miss about this, is about the whole thing? I miss the luck element and the chance element of networking. I mean, I went down to the south of Ireland recently, and I played in a little small golf tournament, and I met this guy who had a VR headset, and he was an American guy, and he was developing VR for musicians in the States. And he suddenly started saying to me, "What do you do?" And I said, "Well, I'm in education, online education." "Oh, online education." He said, "Oh, that's very interesting," he said, "because VR is really coming up in that world. And why don't you try this headset on? I'm like, see if you can, see if you can think of any situations in online education where this would be really useful." And it was, whether anything comes out of that or not, you never have that online. You don't have those luck meetings or those chance meetings online. So maybe a little bit off topic here, but it's fascinating of how networking is important, and how like that element of chance when you meet somebody is so interesting and so important.
Julian, I think it's very important that you raise it. You know, it's those little conversations we are missing out on. But, you know, when I say we're more productive, we need to be very, very focused, you know, in our delivery. And that's where the productivity really comes to the fore. But you are absolutely right. I think, you know, missing out on those chance conversations, I think we all behave particularly well. Here we are, you know, 50 odd people on this session and no interruptions, etc. So we do behave very, very well in the online world. And that can you can lose out in that general networking ability. So it's a good point. It's a very good point.
So look, as you know, we're recording this and we'll send on the recording. So all of the action items that we've discussed today, you can use in your own companies. And we hope that you do. We'll also send this on to anybody who couldn't attend today. But look, just thanks a million, Mike, for all of your inputs.
You're very welcome. Enjoyed.
There's a question here from Tasha. Will I take that? There's one from Tasha about CX individuals appear to be undervalued by organizations. What tips can you provide to change? will I take this? Yeah.
Perfect,
Sure,
Brian.
please, Brian.
CX individuals appear to be undervalued by organizations. What tips can you provide to change the perception of this? I think it's to get closer to HR. I think it's as simple as that. I think CX need a monthly meeting with HR and talking about what they're doing and the impact on their people. Yeah.
And it's also to get closer to senior management, obviously, right? So it's almost it's all about getting that leadership buy-in and trying to get management to invest in the human side as well as they invest in the technology side.
Yeah. And let me add to that, because it's come up time and time again, and thanks, Tasha, for your question. It has come up time and time again. I think there is a new paradigm taking place, and it is around recognizing that frontline and agents are doing a lot more than they would have done in their previous roles. Their roles are changing. Their skill sets are needed. They need to be better educated. And therefore, we must recognize that they're critically important. Brian, you said something really interesting, that staff are now really representative of the brand. So they have all of these new pressures. And I think what we're going to see in the future is, if we don't look after them brilliantly, we're going to lose them. And, you know, we're seeing these huge issues taking place, particularly again in the States, where there's a resignation movement taking place right across the States, because people are saying, you know what, I want a job today that has purpose. I want a job today that I'm respected in. You know, and you know, if we don't address that, because I think, you know, we're sick and tired of seeing leaders in large organizations making huge salaries where the people on the front line aren't, and that has got to be balanced. So I think there will be a movement, and I think we will see greater effort made to reward those on the front line.